In this lesson, we will reinforce some of our previously learned topics about working with 3D layers to create an interesting composition, and then talk about using collapse transformations with those types of layers. Okay, so I want to create a new composition, and then we will add some things to that and then bring it back into our main composition. So go ahead and come over here to your project panel and just hit the Create a New Composition button, and we want that to be 1280 by 720. And then I'm going to come over here, and we're going to be using the footage that we brought in earlier. So go ahead and grab that tablet animation and just drag that on to your timeline. So we see that we just have a little clip of this animation here, and I want to scale this down a little bit so that it's not taking up the whole screen. And then let's go ahead and bring this into the 3D layers. So turn that on as a 3D layer. And if you don't want to scale it down, you can actually just push it backwards in Z space. So that's going to kind of act the same way, give us the same look. So we can just practice with that. And then I want to go ahead and duplicate this a few other times so that we have 4 of these layers all together. And I just want their center points here to, well, the lower right-hand corners I want to be right in the notches of this crosshair that we have here in the middle with Title Action Safe turned on. And then I want to move the center points so that they are down in this lower right-hand corner. So if you want to move a center point, we learned about the Pan Behind Anchor Point tool. So go ahead and grab that, and we'll just drag it down into that lower right corner. So now those center points are in the crosshairs of the Title Action Safe. So now I want to just go ahead and duplicate this layer. So with my layer selected, go ahead and hit Control D, and then we can move this into this other lower right quadrant. And now I want to again move this anchor point so that it is up there next to those crosshairs. And then this one, maybe we want to bring a little bit closer to our camera. So I'm going to pull that forward a little bit. And it's okay that it's falling off of our composition. I just want to get an interesting composition and a lot of contrast between the sizes. And I want to go ahead and duplicate this one a couple more times. So I just had that selected and hit Control D twice. We're going to move this into our other quadrants. So now we have a composition that looks a little bit like this. And let's go ahead and move those anchor points so they are also right there in the middle of the composition. Okay, so now all of your anchor points should be in the middle area of the composition, kind of just in those quadrants of those crosshairs. Now I want to push this one back just a little bit further so it's smaller. And we'll do the same thing with this one. If you start having a hard time grabbing that Z handle, you can always come into the position data of the tablet that you're controlling, hit the P key, and then just drag from there. So this one I want to be the smallest. And I'm just going to push that pretty far back. So now we have a composition that looks like this. And if you want to, you can zoom in here and maybe reposition these just a little bit better so they're more level and spaced about the same inside of those crosshairs. So that's just going to make it a little bit more balanced, and that just looks a little more, has just better spacing in between all of those. So let's go back out to our main composition now, and I want to grab the composition that we just created, which is going to be Comp2, and we should probably name that a little more descriptively. So in our project panel, we can just right click that, go to rename, and we can just call this Videos. And then let's go ahead and drag that onto our composition. It's going to just take it a moment to update, and you may need to drag this so that the beginning of it is close to your current time indicator, just so that you're able to see what's happening at the beginning. And sometimes this is a problem I run into whenever I create compositions that have a longer duration than anything that I put inside of them. So one of the things we can do to fix that is just go back inside of that videos comp, and we can trim our comp area to the end of this piece of footage. So remember, we learned the end shortcut key will trim that work area if we have our current time indicator in the place we want to trim it to. So I just hit the end key. And then if we want to make the comp length this new work area length, we can right click to bring up the context menu for the work area and say trim comp to work area. So now you see that my entire composition duration for the videos comp is just a little bit over 6 seconds because that's what we've trimmed it to. And now if we go back out to our main composition, you can see that this comp is much shorter. So that's just going to be a little bit easier to work with and to tell where you are in that composition. So what I want to happen with this videos comp is I want my graph that I've created to extend out of the comp that we have here, and then we'll move our camera up so that it's following that line, and then these videos that we've created here are going to pop up next to the little pointer. So we need to add a camera movement to our null object. So I'm just going to go ahead and turn off the videos comp for a moment, and I've just switched off that eyeball, and I want my camera to start moving just right about here whenever it's just about to exit the side of my composition. So I'm going to go ahead and add another keyframe here so that it's telling my camera that this whole time I wanted it to stay in the same position so we can finish watching this animation. And then over about the next 12 frames, we'll go ahead and pan our camera up in the direction that our graph is moving. So let's move forward 12 frames by holding Shift and hit the page down key one time. And then we'll hit page down 2 more times to bring us forward those 2 extra frames. Then you can just grab your null layer and we'll go ahead and move it on the x-axis and then also on the y-axis. And because all these layers are 3D, it's really easy for us to just reposition this camera and get it exactly where we want it. So I'm going to move it somewhere just kind of coming out of that lower left-hand corner. And this would also be a good time if you want to go ahead and fix the positioning of your pointer that we created. You can do that now. So let's just go ahead and take a look at the keyframes for that pointer, because you're noticing that this is as far as it's extending, and we want this to come all the way to the end of the graph. So go ahead and select the medium yellow solid, hit the P key to bring up that position, and we'll just drag our current time indicator right there to that last set of frames, and then we can reposition this right on the end of the graph. And you want to make sure you don't accidentally grab your background layer, since that's the thing that we have right behind this. So if you want to lock that background layer, that's going to make it just a little bit easier for you to control. And now I'm just going to finish up repositioning my circle. You want to make sure that it's pretty close to the end and that this edge here isn't resting right on the end of the graph. So I want it to be at more the lower left or middle of that circle. Okay, so that's going to follow the line a lot better. And let's go ahead and turn on motion blur for that layer so that it matches the look of our graph. So that's going to be right there. And now as it gets to the end, it's following that much better. So now I want to go ahead and reposition the videos layer that we have brought into this comp. So right about here on this keyframe of our null object is where I want that videos comp to start. So I'm going to go ahead and drag that so that it's beginning at the same point as the last keyframe of our null. And we can turn that videos comp back on. And I also want to create this as a 3D layer. But because we already put 3D layers inside of my composition, I'm just going to turn on collapse transformations for now. So come down here and turn on that switch. So now we see that we're recognizing the 3D position data that we have inside of our comp, but it's going to be a little bit difficult to control moving it without any kind of 3D handles. So I also want to turn this layer into a 3D layer, as well as recognizing the 3D information inside of that comp. So I can do that now just by turning on the 3D switch. And you see that now that size of that comp isn't so large, and we have a nice handle here that we can grab to reposition these layers as we need them. So I'm going to zoom back in here, and I'm just going to kind of reposition these so that they are kind of just coming in with the spacing equal between the layers and the pointer that we've created. And because this smaller layer is so far in the background, it looks like it's gotten off a little bit as far as just the way that it's lining up with the rest of our composition. So I can fix that by going back into that comp, and let's go ahead and bring this one forwards in space just a little bit. So we're going to make it bigger just by bringing it back towards the camera a little bit. And then I'm going to scale it down so that it still looks like it has that contrast in size with my other layers. So now that I've repositioned that Z space, I'm just going to grab that upper right hand corner, hold Shift, and we'll scale that back down so that it looks like it's the same size as earlier. Now let's go back out to our main composition. You can see that that looks just a little bit better. And if you want to, you can go ahead and even move that up a little bit. And that just fits better in that space. Now, when our camera moves, it's going to be really interesting to see that Z space interacting with the camera that we have here. If the camera moves, we're going to definitely see some parallax and perspective change. But right now, it almost just looks like a 2D comp. So whenever we exit this comp, it's going to be really interesting looking. Now, one last thing that I want to do that I'm noticing here is that this comp just really kind of pops on once we get to that last keyframe. So I want to introduce these a little bit more interestingly, and that's part of the reason why I had you move those anchor points inside of this comp earlier. So let's go ahead and double click to get back inside of our comp. And then just right here at the beginning, I want to add some scale keyframes so this scales up over time. So let's go ahead and select our first video and hit the S key to bring up that scale. And I'm going to go ahead and just set a keyframe here with the 100%. And then I'm going to drag that keyframe forward so that that is lining up with about the 1 second mark. And then for the rest of the values here at the beginning, I just want this to be 0%. So go ahead and type in a 0 and hit enter, and that's going to plug that in for all 3 of those values. So now you can see it looks something a little bit like this. And I want these keyframes to be duplicated and added to the rest of my comps. However, this second comp that we have here, the scale is going to be a little bit different. So go ahead and bring up the scale for this one. You see that this one's only at 56.5%. So you will probably want to set this keyframe separately without copying it, since its scale has been changed independently of the other 3. So we can go ahead and turn on that stopwatch there, and then turn this back down to 0 at the first frame. Now for our other 2, we know that they have the same scale as our top layer, so I can just grab those 2 keyframes and copy and paste them. So I'm going to hit Control C to copy those, and then select both of these layers and hit Control V to paste the keyframes. So now if I want to take a look at that, I can hit the S key, and you see that those keyframes were pasted in exactly the same place on those 2 layers. So pretty interesting change that we have there. And it looks just a little bit different with this one higher up inside of this comp, but we know that on the outside that looks completely normal. Now something else I could do to add a little more visual interest is to change the animation temporal interpolation of these keyframes. So we can change all of these keys to easy ease just by selecting the keys and going up to the animation menu, choosing keyframe assistant, and we can just choose easy ease, since those are going to be the only scale frames that we add. Okay, so now let's go back out to our main composition, and we can just really quickly watch the animation that we've created. And I'm just going to start this from this first null keyframe that we have set up there for the transition from our other composition to the new video composition. Okay, so now our RAM preview has completed, and I'm noticing that the camera move is pretty fast that we've created, and this area here looks pretty good. So I'm happy with this animation, but the camera animation is too fast. So let's go ahead and give that a few more frames. I'm just going to drag that out in between 13 and 14 seconds, and then we'll push this composition forward so that it's happening about the same time as that keyframe hits. So now it looks something a little bit more like that. And we can do another RAM preview just to double check that. And that looks like that's previewing through pretty quickly. So that looks much better, just a little bit more natural and less jarring that is now just has a little bit more space to complete that animation. So in this lesson, we reinforced some of our previous skills, and we learned that we do not have to lose the 3D position data that's been entered inside of a separate composition as long as we remember to turn on our collapse transformation switch.